The 90s, home to some of gaming's greatest moments, innovations, legends, and of course, failures. Not every game can measure up to what we see as today's classics. A lot of games just plain fell through the cracks. Some of those games for good, others for bad. Here we will discuss one of the games that should have stayed buried, because looking back, we have to ask, what were they thinking? Ex-Mutants, originally a comic book series that debuted in 1986, being acquired by the now defunct Malibu Comics before being absorbed by Marvel Comics. Malibu was famous for its Ultra Force series, which got a Saturday morning cartoon show alongside Marvel's X-Men. Ex-Mutants, however, never did gain that notoriety, part of which due to its rather convoluted and odd storyline, which takes over 4 minutes to explain after booting up the Genesis cartridge. So if you want a condensed version, instead of watching the sped-up version that I've included at the beginning of this video, mankind no longer exists as humans. After various wars, biological and nuclear weapon detonations, the environment is all sorts of screwy, and mutated us all into freak show mutants, with green goo for skin or oversized blue brains. One cyborg scientist decides that he wants to recover mankind's lost genetic heritage and transform 6 people back into humans, ignoring the story trope of the fact that the world in which we would be living in would be radioactive and contaminated with all sorts of biological weapon remnants. Human would probably not be able to survive, die, which is why we mutated in the first place. But, ignoring that, onto a more odd, obvious observation of the world that we would live in, and that everyone in the future stops using guns, and melee weapons become the weapon of choice, as seen by the male lead character wielding a giant battle axe. Later you'll see the female lead using a sword weapon of some sort. The game itself leads with that in the story, but sub-weapons are a big part of the game. Some sub-weapons are grenade-type weapons that bounce around or home in on various opponents. Other power-ups include making your melee weapon a projectile weapon. Here you see the large battle axe shooting out smaller axes. I'm not entirely sure why, but it shoots. Only downside with that is, every time you press the attack button, it shoots your ranged addition, making ammo conservation next to impossible. As well as other typical 90s platformers, enemies are numerous. Some respawn, others don't, depending on what you do with them. Some of the enemies that are killed, some that just appear out of nowhere, like the blobs that explode and do green acid goo, seem to respawn at will. Other hazards consist of lasers, saw blades, lava pits, fire, and all sorts of other life-draining traps. Precision platforming and meticulous attention to hitbox detail is a must, as this game is very unforgiving in those areas. Jumping onto a certain platform that will respond to you landing on it by twisting or opening into dropping you into the abyss seem to be quite plentiful, common, and unforgiving as far as timing. Saw blade traps, like the one seen here, are quite easy to jump into or even be hit by as it spins around after you've passed by it. All of this adds a false increased difficulty to the game, as no matter how you pay attention to the game, it's entirely possible to jump into an unforeseen trap and die, as seen there. All in all, I have to say that this really isn't a bad game. The source material, however, is the weakest part of the game, as the storyline makes no sense to those paying attention to it, and to this day, I have yet to meet anyone who actually remembers the comic at all, let alone fondly. As a platformer, it doesn't distinguish itself from other games of the time. It doesn't stand out by adding anything new or innovating to the genre. It has solid mechanics, but when you compare it to games like X-Men, The Avengers, Spawn, all popular comics, popular source material, that had well put together games, if not the best received games. But having this try to compete just doesn't stand the test of time. But there have been worse tie-in games with worse source material before that have endured to this day and are still fondly remembered in the hearts and minds of gamers, comic book enthusiasts everywhere. However, due to its preposterous story, over-the-top designs, even for the 90s, we have to ask, what were they thinking in allowing this game to be released to the general population? Who thought that this game would stand shoulder to shoulder with other popular comic book or other medium titles of the time? I guess that's an answer we will never know.